Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our TFN session on economic recovery post-Covid-19. This session is going to look at how the North can best deliver a strong economic recovery post-Covid-19, a really important topic. The North's challenge is unique in that not only is there a need to regain lost ground, but also move towards levelling up, that all-important levelling up agenda that Boris is constantly talking about. This session will look at, we'll explore the potential challenges as a result of COVID-19, but also the already existing obstacles facing the North, of which there are many, I'm sure you'll all be aware. We'll talk about changes to the Green Book, which were announced in the spending review. Will it help to level up the North? How much do you think travel patterns will be affected as life moves back to normal post-COVID-19? And beyond transport, what do you think will be the biggest challenge as a result of COVID-19? We've got a fantastic panel here this afternoon, and I can't wait to hear what they're going to say. Please do ask questions in the chat box, whatever you want to know on the subject of economic recovery post-COVID-19, and our panelists, I'm sure, will be able to chat about it. I'm going to go over to Dan Jarvis. Dan is the Mayor of Sheffield City region. As I'm sure you're aware, after 15 years serving in the army, Dan became the first person since World War II to leave in order to contest a parliamentary by-election. He was first elected as Labour MP for Barnsley Central in March 2011, and he represents his city region very well. Over to you, Dan.
Well, thank you very much, David, for that introduction. In the summer, seems a long time ago now, but in the summer, the Prime Minister committed to, as he described it, doubling down on levelling up. It was a nice turn of phrase, but as we move beyond speeches to the hard numbers of the spending review, I'm afraid that I concluded that the reality is not measuring up to the rhetoric. We all accept the Chancellor is facing uniquely challenging circumstances, but there are some simple truths here. First, levelling up is measured not in good intentions, but in real investment and empowerment. Second, if we're going to talk about a transformation, the scale of that investment has to be transformational. It has to be substantially above the baseline level because it needs to compensate for profound disadvantages and a long legacy of underinvestment. Tinkering isn't going to cut it. Now, the spending review was the point at which the government needed to stop talking the talk and start walking the walk. It was a litmus test, if you like, of their seriousness. And I believe that they failed that test because what we saw was not an increase, not even tinkering, but a significant decrease in the level of investment, along with a major shift away from devolution. The roughly 1.5 billion a year spent from the local growth fund is coming to an end. Now, as far as we can see, there is nothing to directly replace it. There is a new levelling up fund, which is worth 4 billion over the life of this parliament. That's about 1.3 billion a year. But those funds are under Whitehall control, not devolved to mayors and local authorities and LEPs like the local growth fund was. As we've seen with the Towns Fund, that centralisation is a recipe for short-term, uncoordinated funding that weakens our pursuit of the big strategic changes we want to see here in the North. It's vulnerable to politicisation as different areas compete against each other for piecemeal pots of cash. Only 600 million of this money will be available in the coming year, just as the full economic damage of COVID hits. The 900 million Getting Building Fund will help mitigate the damage, but only in the short term. Meanwhile, the roughly 1.5 billion of EU funding is to be replaced by money from the Shared Prosperity Fund. But even leaving aside whether that covers what we would have got from the EU next year, and South Yorkshire was due a very substantial increase, only 220 million will be available for the Shared Prosperity Fund next year. And it's not yet clear how it will be spent and how much control over it will be devolved. So there will be uncertainty just when we need certainty. And as we're discussing today, transport, of course, is one of the greatest tests for levelling up. And the chatter over the future of the northeastern leg of HS2 is deeply disconcerting. There were arguments for and against HS2, but cancelling or significantly delaying Phase 2B East risks undermining Northern Powerhouse Rail and other local projects, and with it, much of the case for HS2 as levelling up. So we need the integrated rail plan to be followed by a commitment to deliver NPR in full, and soon, along with HS2, 2B East, starting with the parts that are integral to Northern Powerhouse Rail. Neither of those things must be at the expense of fixing the unacceptably decrepit local transport infrastructure, which affects our communities most directly. So it's not just railways, but other key elements like our buses and our active travel that we also need to focus on. In the end, the only test is whether we finally get the public transport in the north, which is fit for purpose for our communities and our economy. I think it is only fair to say that, of course, we are living through extraordinarily difficult times with huge calls on our public finances. But I don't accept that means we can't invest. On the contrary, there is an urgent and widely accepted need for massive public investment to boost our battered economy, and the cost of borrowing to fund it is, of course, exceptionally low. However, if you truly believe we can't afford to do levelling up now, say so. Say you're putting other priorities first and the North will have to wait. What I think is unacceptable is to shuffle the same money as yesterday into a new pot and call that levelling up, because it isn't, and it's not being honest with people here in the North. I believe that this is precisely the moment we need an absolutely transformative ambition for our country, not just for levelling up, but for our wider economy and the radical transition to net zero carbon we so urgently need. I hope that the government believes that too, but if they do, they need to start showing it, not just in words, but in their actions. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Dan. Some really good points there. I think from what I'm picking up reporting for the Sunday Times, a lot of leaders in the North share Dan's frustrations about the levelling up pot being controlled in Whitehall. It's not being devolved in any way, and also really important the issue that Dan mentioned on HS2, the Eastern Line. What is going on with it, and is it going to be delivered in full? And is the levelling up process agenda going to turn into what we saw under Theresa May in the Northern Powerhouse agenda? Empty promises. So I'll move on to, thanks Dan, I'll move on to Kate Bell. Kate is the head of Rights International Social and Economics Department, the department which leads the TUC's work on boosting employment rights, promoting social and economic policies that benefit working people, and building international solidarity. Kate, over to you.
Thanks so much, David, and thanks for having me. I'm a late substitution for my colleague, Lynn Collins, who leads our Northwest region and is sick, and sends her apologies for not being here today. So I'm going to try and stick to my 4 minutes, and I kind of had really 4 points to make about how we build a better recovery, not only from the coronavirus crisis, but also from the last 10 years of austerity, which have hit working people right across the UK, but also we think exacerbated some of the regional inequalities that have been experienced in the North. So 4 points I think that we need to really focus on. So the first is moving from that austerity to investment. And Dan Jarvis has already talked about the level of investment that's needed. I know that Transport for the North have set out their kind of £5 billion pipeline. And at a national level, we've called for £85 billion worth of investment to kind of green our economy. But I think it's really important not only that we deliver that investment, but also how that investment is delivered, and that we do that in a way that actually helps to create jobs. So one of the things we've called for is for every large infrastructure project to come with a framework framework agreement, which sets out the jobs which will be created in the local area, sets out how jobs will be created in local supply chains, and also, really importantly, sets out the terms and conditions that will actually be applied, when that project is being constructed, when it's being built. And I think, we are starting to see some movement on that transition to a net zero economy, more recognition of the importance of that. And it's a huge opportunity for jobs, but we have to get that right. Those have to be decent jobs, and they have to be visible to people how those projects are delivering decent jobs in their local community. Next point, we have to move from a situation of insecure jobs to secure work. We saw, following the financial crisis, more and more people in insecure forms of contracts. So around 3.9 million people now in some form of insecure work, whether that's kind of false self-employment, 0 hours contracts, or very low paid self-employment or agency work. And I think one of the challenges we're going to face is people are going to say we're in the midst of an employment crisis, we can't afford to improve the quality of jobs. But if we are going to level up regions, we absolutely have to. And that means not only focusing on those big infrastructure projects, focusing on jobs in manufacturing, but also focusing on the jobs where most people work. So biggest employer sectors, the biggest employing sectors are still the health service and retail, even though we're seeing kind of real problems in the retail sector. And the health service and social care should be a place where we're getting more good quality jobs. Those social care jobs, those retail jobs, those distribution jobs should be decent jobs that people could be proud of. We shouldn't see those as terrible jobs, but we need to desperately improve the quality of those jobs. And that means banning unfair practices like 0 hours contracts. It means raising the minimum wage, and it means giving people a voice at work through their unions. Thirdly, we are unfortunately seeing a kind of unemployment crisis coming towards us. And although we absolutely need to limit that as much as possible, job creation is a really important part of that, both in the private sector and in the public sector. But we have to improve our social security system too. Sick pay is a critical part of that. I think it's kind of amazing that the government, after however many months they've had to fix the sick pay system, still hasn't done so. We're seeing many people unable to access the self-isolation payments, which are being administered by local councils. And we know there's a solution to this, which is fixing our level of sick pay. At the moment, 2 million people miss out on sick pay because they don't earn enough to qualify. That's a ridiculous situation. And we also know that the level of sick pay, £96 a week, is just too low for many, many people to live off. Matt Hancock was interviewed earlier in the year and was asked, could you live off that? And he said no. And I think that's what we've seen as the pandemic has progressed. Many people unable to self-isolate because of that low level of sick pay. We know how to fix this. We need to increase the level of sick pay, and we need to make sure everyone's eligible. But we also need to go wider to fix our social security systems too. I think many people are seeing the kind of pretty horrific results of the 5-week wait that people experience when they claim universal credit, one of the major reasons we're seeing people go to food banks. And we've also got the threat of that extra £20 that has been put in place to slightly boost the level of universal credit being taken away in March. So big need to make sure that people do lose their jobs, don't enter into destitution. We know that a social security system which provides a decent safety net is the best way to help people get back onto their feet, get back into work as quickly as possible, and to avoid the kind of devastation of communities. The last thing I wanted to mention was that we have to make this a recovery in which we prioritise equality. This has been the year of Black Lives Matter, and it's been a year where we've seen the pretty horrific effects of the kind of structural discrimination, particularly faced by Black workers in the labour market, in their higher exposure to jobs where they're at greater risk of COVID and the higher death rates that they've experienced. We know that there's a long way to go before we achieve racial justice in the UK, and we know that the workplace is a critical place where we can actually put those programmes in place. So when we're thinking about how do we deliver those new jobs in transport, how do we deliver those better jobs in social care, how do we deliver a social security system that works forever, for everybody, and forever, hopefully, we also want to be making sure that that's done in a way that actually puts those equality considerations front and centre of how we deliver the recovery that we know we need. I think that's probably my 4 minutes, and it's certainly my 4 points, so I'll stop there, but very happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you, Kate. That was great, and yeah, some really good points again. And obviously, that's something that I worry about. All our graduates going from our great universities in the north feeling like they have to go down to London because those good quality jobs aren't there. How do we fix that and stop the brain drain? On to Francis Coppola. Francis spent 17 years working for banks, where much of her work was concerned with settlement, accounting and risk management systems. She left banking in 2002 to concentrate on her singing career, but after the financial crisis, returned to write about the banks that so nearly destroyed our world economy. She now writes on topics of finance and economics for a huge range of publications. Francis, over to you.
Hi, everybody, and it's a real pleasure to be here and a privilege to get a chance to ramble on at you about some of the things I've been thinking about. I think that we need to see COVID in the context of what's been going on anyway. So what I've been noticing is that COVID has been accelerating existing trends. So, for example, the trend towards home working was already happening. The trend away from face-to-face shopping malls and department stores and high streets towards online was already happening. A lot of this was already happening before COVID hit, and what has happened is that the pandemic has really accelerated that movement. I'm also encouraged to see that it also appears to have accelerated thinking about transition to a green economy and zero carbon too, which I think we probably should all be rather pleased about. But it does mean we need to think about how we recover from this, because clearly the way in which we recovered from the last crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, isn't going to be open to us this time. We can't afford to do that kind of austerity again. I don't think we could afford to do it then. We certainly can't afford it now. And so the case has to be made for saying we need proper investment in things like the health service, in social care, and in, as Kate has been saying, real jobs for real people. The question is where those jobs are. The recovery from the last crisis was very much built upon the very retail and hospitality jobs that have been really badly hit in this crisis. We have relied upon consumer spending really to prop up the economy for the last 10 years. Now, the question now is, are we going to go back into that kind of consumer bubble? And I think we probably are not. And I'm not sure we should want to. So the decline of retail and hospitality, of, you know, the coffee shop bubble, the sandwich shop bubble, much of which has been to do with the fact that the way in which people have worked has been about moving into city centres. All of that has been really disrupted by COVID, and maybe it's time to take stock and say, do we really want to live like this? So although I totally agreed that we desperately need investment in transport in the north, in public transport, in buses, and also in roads and private cars too, because realistically, public transport isn't going to cover everything. And, you know, we do need this kind of joined up thinking that Dan's been talking about. We also need to pay attention to the fact that there is a move away from that kind of commuter lifestyle towards staying where you are and working and being much more integrated with your local community in your towns and your villages. We need much better communications. We need broadband so that people can do that. And we also need perhaps to be encouraging the kind of revitalization of small local businesses that can really support people where they are, rather than requiring them to go and get into a car or on a train or on a bus and travel into the centre of Manchester or into London or into the centre of Newcastle or wherever to work and then come back again at the end of the day, or in the case of London, perhaps a week later. Perhaps it is a time that part of our levelling up is about saying, actually, our rural economies, our towns and our villages are every bit as important as our city centres, and we need to support them too. And we need to make it possible for people to integrate with their local economy and work where they are, if that's what they choose to do, and not assume that everybody gets in their cars and trains and buses and goes into city centres all the time. Not that I have anything against city centres, but that's been part of the inequality of the last 10 years or even longer, has been this idea that you could travel into work and then travel back again. And there's a whole economic infrastructure built around that has crumbled because of COVID. And I'm not sure it's going to come back in the way that it did. I think I'm also going to question whether we really want to try and recover retail in the form that it was before. So, for example, we're seeing the death of department stores. COVID has accelerated that. We've seen Debenhams collapse, we've seen Arcadia collapse, but that was already happening. Is that something we want to stop, or do we accept that actually that kind of retail is going online? And we need to think creatively about what we do with high streets, what we do with old shopping malls, what we do with old department stores. Can we move to mixed development? Can we increase housing in city centres? Can we redeploy old shopping malls and department stores in some creative way? I think as part of our recovery from COVID and our levelling up and our generally can we revitalise this economy, I think we need to be looking at that kind of creative thinking about what we want our economy to look like and how we want to be working and what we want to be doing in our leisure time and how people want to live going forward. I think that's probably about my 4 minutes. And I think that's kind of the heart of what I want to say. Let's creatively reimagine what our economy should look like going forward, rather than assuming that we can simply redo whatever we did before to get out of the slump.
Thank you, Frances. Some really interesting points there on the social aspects of COVID, and I know, from my own personal experience, I've had to work from home far more than I used to, and I think a lot of people have had to, and businesses have adjusted, and even PwC. I was speaking to someone senior there who's telling me that they'll never go back, and the workforce don't want to go back to the way they were working before. People probably will stay more local. Moving on now to Peter Molyneux. Peter leads the major roads team at Transport for the North. He works in partnership with the Department for Transport, Highways England and the local and combined authorities to determine and deliver the priorities for investment on strategic and major road network aligned to the strategic transport plan. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, everybody. The Northern Powerhouse Independent Economic Review found that the North is about 25% less productive than the rest of England. And the main reason for that was actually poor connectivity, and particularly east-west connectivity. And what the report said, that if we were better connected, then we could create nearly 850,000 jobs and nearly £300 billion worth of extra economic activity above business as usual, through the agglomeration of economic centres in both urban and rural areas. And this really was the catalyst for Transport for the North being created. And Transport for the North has the leaders, civic leaders and business leaders from across the North. And in 2019, we produced our strategic transport plan and a 30-year investment programme to deliver that big prize of jobs and extra economic activity. But most importantly, it was about providing a joined up road and rail network that can move people, goods and services in an efficient, inclusive and sustainable, and most importantly, a user-friendly way. We've used this evidence base from the investment programme to write to the Secretary of State for the Department of Transport to put forward an urgent and compelling case for accelerated delivery of the transport infrastructure and other investments as part of our economic recovery plan for the North. As referenced earlier, this £5 billion Northern Infrastructure Pipeline includes road, rail, active travel, and also smart ticketing processes. We predict that actually for every pound spent, we will return nearly £3 on that investment. And most importantly, in the short term, we can create 20,000 vital construction and design jobs, which is going to be really important as we come out of this COVID process. For those of you who know, the government has a green book. This is the way Treasury appraises policies, programmes and projects. And this has been reviewed, which hopefully will now help the North get greater investment, because it has been underinvested in the past. So it's more about focusing on the strategic case, about how it can benefit communities, the levelling up that Dan was talking about before, but also decarbonisation, which is going to be crucial as we make sure that we help the health of all the people in our businesses. And decarbonisation will be an opportunity. It'll be an opportunity for new businesses to start in the North, where we already have the skills, particularly in the wind and other industries such as that. Part of this will be creating new behaviour change. Part of that will be regaining the trust to use public transport again. And therefore, what we need is an integrated ticketing process so that people, like they do in London, have the ability to have real-time information and also a fair price promise as we start to move forward. Roads will always be part of the future. What we've seen in the summer was that roads could be adapted to take more active travel. And I think what we'll start to see is a change, and we need to build a transport system that is more agile to react to the responses that we go forward. One of the things that became very clear in the COVID crisis was the importance of freight, the importance of filling our supermarket shelves as we got forward. One of the issues that we have is that 90% of our freight actually moves by road. So even if we can double the amount of freight by rail, there will still be a significant need for us to invest in our roads. And finally, there's an awful lot of housing to be done and well-being. And this is going to be crucial that we build houses around transport hubs so that people don't have to drive as much as they did in the past. I think the last analogy I'd like to use is the jigsaw model. I would like to say that our investment programme is the picture on the jigsaw box, and the schemes in the investment programme are the individual pieces of the jigsaw that will pull together to actually we have an integrated and smart network that will provide a strong and valuable future to the people of the North in a post-Brexit world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, for that. You know, it's critical, isn't it, that, you know, the idea of regaining trust in our public services and public transport. I know from personal experience, on Saturday, I tried to get into Manchester city centre and the metro wasn't working. I thought, why didn't I get the car? But it's got to, you know, I've got to get out of that mode of thinking. We're going to open up now into questions and a question and answer session. I'll ask my own questions, and also I'll take as many questions as I can from the chat function. So do please keep contributing, and I'll ask as many questions as I can before we have to wrap up. I just want to start on a broad one, but it's something that Francis picked up on and mentioned, and I just want to go to Dan first on it. Just the idea that, you know, we've changed as people during this pandemic. We stay more local. We don't go into cities as much. Is there enough attention by the government and by the combined authorities and you know, by you, Dan, as you know, Mayor of Sheffield City region? Do you think there's enough being focused on the towns and the villages? You know, particularly where you're from. You know, is there a focus on Barnsley as much as there is on Sheffield for the economic recovery?
Well, good question. Look, I think the first thing to say is nobody quite knows what the longer term impact of the pandemic will be on our society and the way that we live our lives. I'm absolutely determined, though, to make sure that we draw some good and some positive things and developments out of the experience that we've been through as a country. But the truth of the matter is nobody quite knows what the long-term impact will be in terms of whether people's commuting habits will change and what that might mean for future public transport requirements, about how we interact with others as a society, what it means for shopping, what it means for town and city centres. All of that is still to be determined, but I think it's incredibly important that national government and local government and regional government, metro mayors like myself, look to use this as an opportunity, a catalyst for change, if you like, to do things differently in the future, particularly when it comes to environmental issues. And I think, you know, this has provided us with the opportunity to rethink some quite fundamental elements of the way that we live our lives. But as I say, we don't know the extent to which those will persist for the longer term. In terms of your specific point about the balance between cities and towns, you know, we have a devolved model that is based around the city. So it is literally a city region, and that is the only model that the government previously have wanted to consider. I think there is a real risk from that this notion that you invest everything into the big and bright lights of the city and there'll be a kind of ripple trickle down effect. I don't think that that's the right approach. And I say that as someone who represents a city as a mayor, but also a town as a member of parliament. So I think increasingly we need to look at how we can spread economic growth. Yes, of course, we want it in the cities, and that is a really powerful engine and driver of growth. But let's not forget about our towns. Let's not forget about the rural economy. There are some particular challenges when it comes to transport. We're in the process of looking at a particular pilot to improve rural bus services. We've got the national bus strategy that the government are going to announce in the not too distant future. So there are some opportunities there, but we need to be organised about taking them up. And we need to make sure that that representation of the towns and the villages is strong in Parliament and in the context of our combined authorities, to make sure that they're not forgotten about. And it's certainly something that I'm very mindful of.
Thanks, Dan. What about you, Peter? Do you work with government side, alongside them every day, don't you, with the Department for Transport? What are they saying? Do you think it's business as usual, or are they taking into account these possible new trends that Francis is talking about? People want to stay local, or are we going to be encouraged to go back into the cities, business as normal? What's changing?
I think we're having to change all the way we appraise and model schemes. We used to look to the past to predict the future. I think we've got to decide the future and make sure that we provide what it is that we want in the future. I think the key thing, I think the department has been struggling because they've had to deal with COVID and Brexit in terms of the Department for Transport. But I think in terms of the art of the possible, I think new technology, whether that's the ability to have on-demand services as we move forward. I think we've also got to work better at scale and pace because it does take too long. And I think one of the things that we're hoping as we move forward is that if we can start to get devolved budgets to the north, then actually that's a single pot that we can spend more wisely and move away potentially from some of these competitive funding streams, which can take time and resources away from actually improving people's lives.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. And Kate, so I'll get on to you, Francis, as the starter of this kind of topic. But Kate, what do you sense from workers generally? When I talk to PwC and some of the really kind of senior, businesses in Manchester, but some of them are the kind of big global ones that are London led. They are changing up and they are listening to workers and they are doing these flexible schemes that might mean you stay in your town or your village, which will hit the city economies, won't they, naturally? What are you picking? What do you think workers are keen on?
I think the first thing to say is it's really important to recognise that there's loads of workers who haven't been able to work from home during this pandemic. So if you work in social care, if you work in construction, if you work in a hospital, if you work in a shop, you haven't been working from home. And I think it's really important that we pay as much attention to those people's working conditions as we do to those of us whose, main health risk has been kind of eye strain from too much Zoom. But obviously there are changing working practices due to kind of, these like the basic availability of technology to be able to do this. And we've been doing some focus groups recently and we're getting a kind of, I guess, a sort of middle way, I suppose, if that doesn't sound too much like a cop out, that, people are saying, I'm going to go a bit mad if I have to stay at home all the time. I need to see my colleagues, I need to leave the house, I want to go to the office some of the time, but actually this has made it much easier for me to meet my caring responsibilities, to spend more time with my family, perhaps for many people to spend a bit less time on the commute, and I'd like to maintain some of that flexibility. And I guess if you think about the debates we've been having about other forms of flexible working over the last decade or so, we have very, very slowly been moving to a position where it turns out you don't have to work 9 to 5 days a week in the office in order to do many jobs. And of course, for many people, they've always been working shift work. I noticed somebody in the chat earlier was talking about shifts at kind of working at a chemicals plant, never been working a kind of 9 to 5 regular job. And I think we have got to kind of imagine flexibility and imagine a bit more choice for workers, but we've got to do so in a way that also includes people who might be doing shift work at a factory, who might be doing shift work at a care home, who might be doing shift work in a shop, and make sure that they also have some choice and flexibility about when and how they're working, whether that's better notice of your shifts, whether that's payments when your shifts are cancelled, so that we don't kind of end up with a divide where some people have a lot of control over their working time and some people have even less perhaps than they do today.
Sure, thanks Kate. And well, I know from my own experience that the newspapers executives, they like to see bums on seats because they think we're all slacking off if we're not, present in the office. But do you think we can be more? Are we as productive, Francis? Do you think that if we do go forwards in post-COVID into this sort of home-based, more flexible working, is it going to hit the economy, or can we be as productive?
I think it rather depends what we're doing, doesn't it? I mean, anybody who's got a long commute, if they are not spending so much time on the commute, potentially could be more productive. And more importantly, and I think we should remember this, that what people do at work is not the sum total of everything they do that's productive. So if it gives people more time to do things in their local communities and with their own families, that is also productive. It might not count towards GDP, but it's hugely important to our well-being as a society. So from that point of view alone, actually encouraging a little bit more localism in working might be a good thing. But it does, as Kate was saying, rather depend what you're doing, and there will always be people who need to travel for work, and we need to make that as easy for them as possible. And there will always be people who have complicated working patterns, and we need to make it to create as much flexibility for people as we can, because actually the way you get the best out of people, the way you make people most productive, is to remove the obstacles in their way to being productive. And that means sort of working with the way they live, the way they have to live and so forth, rather than trying to kind of hitting barriers all the time. It seems to me we've got an opportunity now really to reimagine work as part of a more kind of holistic approach to how people live.
Thanks, Francis. Right, I'm going to move on because I'm conscious of the time. I'm going to move on to the dreaded subject of HS2. There's a few comments in the chat just about integrated travel. Dan spoke in his introduction just about his worries really about the eastern branch of HS2, which is that line that connects Birmingham up through the east of England into Sheffield and up past there to Leeds. There's a few comments in the chat. One of the problems for Sheffield, says Richard Bradford, is its location. Regionally, it's in the north, but with substantial connections to the Midlands. One item for post-COVID recovery would be the government's commitment to continuing electrification of the Midland Main Line North from Market Harborough to the major East Mid cities and Sheffield. That's what Richard Bradford's saying in the chat. There's just something a bit further down, which is, must the North be cajoled into acceptance of HS2 as a precondition for integrated rail in the North? Do we have to wait 20 years before we get this? So, I mean, it's an interesting idea, isn't it, Dan? But I guess Boris Johnson is concerned that, levelling up, it's not just about HS2, we know that, but it's, I think a lot of people think it is an important one, but people are worried that they're not going to see the benefits for 20 years. Are we going to get integrated rail before then? What are your views on that, Dan? And also, how concerned are you about the eastern branch of HS2?
I think the first thing to say is it's really important that we don't just think about levelling up in the context of investment in our transport infrastructure. That is a really important element of what levelling up should be, but it's only a part of the story. Levelling up shouldn't just be about the economy. It should be about investing in our people. It should be about health. COVID has shone a spotlight on all sorts of regional inequalities that we've all known about for far too long. But COVID has reminded us of the need to take decisive action to address some of those completely unacceptable health inequalities that we've lived with for far too long. So let's not make sure that we kind of pigeonhole levelling up as being about investment in our railways, because whilst that is important, There's much more to it than that. But on the subject of investing in our railways, I sometimes wonder whether if HS2 had been called something else, it might have been a bit more palatable. You know, the clue's in the name, high speed. The reality is, and obviously the conversation we're having about commuting and the way in which we live and work in the future is highly relevant to all of this, that for many people, the issue of speed is not a significant factor. That ability to get to London 18 minutes quicker, or whatever it might be, doesn't necessarily impress a huge amount of people, which is why possibly a trick has been missed in the way that HS2 is described, because essentially this is about capacity just as much as it is about speed. Look, what we need from the government urgently is certainty. We've had a period of doubt. Now, the government previously committed to do a number of things which seem to be sort of slightly kind of unpicking and rowing back on. That uncertainty is deeply destabilizing. So we need some leadership from the government. We need them to put their money where their mouth is and actually be clear about what their intentions are. We also need to get this right. You know, we are seeking to upgrade our railway infrastructure, the architecture of our railways, which has been massively overtaken by events. You know, it is way out of date, and the decisions that will be taken now, we will live the consequences of those for generations to come. So government needs to be bold about the kind of financial envelope that it's seeking to invest in our railways, and very quickly and decisively deliver the clarity that we want to see in terms of what their intentions are, because it is really unhelpful not to know. But the final point I just say really quickly, of course we need this transformative investment in bigger ticket railway infrastructure. Of course we need to see that over the longer term, but we also need to look at these things in the round. And the reality is that the majority of my constituents won't commute or travel about on a train. Pre-COVID, it would have been on a bus. That would have been a form of transport they would much more likely have gone on. And that's why we've done a lot of work in South Yorkshire in terms of looking at how we can improve our bus services, but it has to be a partnership arrangement with national government. So we think that we've done our bit in terms of the planning and the kind of identification of what kind of bus service we would want to see in South Yorkshire, but we're still waiting on the national bus strategy and that level of investment to the north of England that we see in London when it comes to people travelling about on the buses. So let's look at it all in the round. That would be my point. Thanks, Dan.
Personally, it's driving me mad. The will they, won't they fully invest in the east leg of HS2, and it seems to be going on for years. And you know, in the east of England, that corridor, we know it's one of the worst connected parts of the country. Peter, what's been said behind the scenes with government? What are you sensing from the Department for Transport about where it's going to go next year with HS2? Are these concerns warranted? Are they going to try and save money by cutting this what Dan would say is a critical transport link?
I think Dan makes some very good points, particularly around decision making. I think the procrastination is one of the reasons that the costs keep going up, because every year you delay, the inflation goes on top of it. So I think that's part of it. I think the problem goes back to my sort of jigsaw analogy, is we keep talking about one scheme in isolation. It's a network. People travel along the network, and what we need is the integrated rail plan for the whole rail network, which improves the existing rail network and the new one. But also, how does that link to roads? Because the roads will have better buses on them, they'll have cycling, they'll have walking, you know, there'll be our deliveries and the way we do that. So I think what we've got to do is get this compelling case. One of the big problems that we have is Department for Transport has siloed budgets, and all the time we're trying to get the argument to fit the budget. And I think what we need to say is, you know, if we're actually talking about whole of government accounts, look, here's a compelling argument which has social benefits, health benefits, educational benefits, skills benefits, the whole of government. So Treasury need to start saying, if we're really seriously about levelling up, then let's put our money where our mouth is and provide a network that's fit for the future.
Thanks, Peter. Just an interesting little side point that someone called Rosie in the chat box has said. Have we looked at using canals more and reconnecting rail, road and waterway hubs? Is that something that you've ever thought about, Peter, or you've looked at using canals more?
Yes, we have. there is obviously it's a slightly slower process, but if you think about it, that's how we moved goods hundreds of years ago. So that is part of it, and we're working with the Canals and River Trust. So yes, that could be part of the solution. I don't think there's any silver bullet here, but anything that, you know, takes away the carbon side of things and actually delivers a service that's fit for purpose, I think, you know, we're seriously looking at.
It's interesting. Sounds worthy of a story. Kate, on to, well, I'm going to get on to the Green Book. I mean, I know that this, you know, the spending review, there was a lot made of the changes, wasn't there, to the formula, you know, the Green Book formula by which the Treasury uses to decide on investment, which has always kind of not been great for the North and has favoured the South East. What does it mean in practice, those changes? Do you think, is anything going to come of it? You know, isn't it still dependent on, you know, they've changed the formula, but they've still got to put the money there into the projects, haven't they? What do you think will actually change on the ground for communities?
So I'm not an expert in the Green Book changes, but I think kind of what we need is changes in the practice. And that's one of the reasons why we think it's so important that government set out some kind of clear investment metrics about, well, how does this actually translate into jobs on the ground, and how does it translate to business for local supply chains? We have actually got good examples of how this has been done before. So when the Olympics were delivered in London, for example, there was a big agreement around the delivery of the Olympics around local jobs, local apprenticeships, and a set of minimum standards that were going to apply to all the jobs that were involved in delivering the Olympics. In the construction of some big power stations, so in Hinkley Point C, actually, they've got a similar agreement which says we're going to deliver this many local jobs, we're going to give this much support to local businesses, these are the number of apprenticeships we'll deliver, and these are the standards that are going to apply on site. And I think we need some really practical, tangible outcomes like that with every big construction project, as well as the decisions in the first place about where those construction projects actually get delivered.
So thanks. Same question to you, Francis. Do you think the Green Book, will it change anything? Is that what matters? You know, the government have made a lot of it. Does it mean anything in reality?
Well, again, like Kate, I'm not much of an expert on the Green Book, really. I mean, clearly the kind of allocation of spending does matter. And I think one of the key themes, sort of unspoken themes of this discussion, is we talk about all these things that need to happen locally, but so much of spending, Dan alluded to this at the beginning, is effectively under the control of Westminster. Westminster is setting the priorities. So with my banking hat on, or my finance hat on, I would be saying that are there any ways in which you can get finance into schemes without having to rely on Westminster all the time? Can you tap local businesses? Can you have some local funding initiatives? I don't know enough about this, but it seems to me that there have to be ways of getting additional money in that don't rely entirely on Westminster for the huge recreation of the economy that we need.
Sure, that must be a huge frustration for you, Dan. The idea that you don't have control over that levelling up pot, do you? I mean, seems to me the biggest stumbling block for devolution, that it's still been, you know, you still have to go to Whitehall to get the money.
I think that's exactly right. I warmly welcome the changes to the Green Book. It'd be a bit churlish of me not to, given that I've called for about 5 years for the Green Book to be amended. So I'm really pleased that it has been. But that's only a part of the story. And as Francis has just rightly said, too much of our decision making is taken by people in Westminster and Whitehall who simply don't have that fingertip understanding of both the challenges and the opportunities that we have here in the north of England. So I've always said that devolution is a process. It's not an event. It's an unfolding story across England. I think it's worked well in other parts of the United Kingdom, but in terms of regional English devolution, I think there is quite a lot further that the government needs to go. And I worry that the spending review indicated a direction of travel which is not towards empowering mayors with greater responsibility and critically resource, that it is moving us back to greater centralised control from Whitehall. And that is not the best way to make decisions, and it's not the best way to commit taxpayers' money. So I hope that the government will, wake up to the real opportunities that devolution has to offer.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. And I think I'm under strict instructions. I think we've slightly overrun. But so I'm just going to draw the session to a close. So I'm just going to do a quick summary. There's some brilliant panelists there, great points. And I think for me, personally, what Dan's, I support the devolution and mayors all the way. And I think, the only way to change the regions is by empowering the regions with more money, but that means the powers to access that money and to devolve money away from Westminster and put it into the hands of people like Dan, like Peter, who know what's going on the ground in their regions. So thanks all, and I could carry on talk about that all day, but I will leave you all there. So thank you for joining, and good luck. Thank you.